And tonight for appointments, Charles, if you could serve for one of the vacancies.
Sure, I can do that.
Okay. There are no public hearings. Old business, we have no applications before us. New business.
We have one application for the construction of 2 basketball courts at 100 Old Farms at the Park and Recs complex. These courts are located to the west of the existing tennis courts complex, this adjacent to a drainage soil stream. There was volleyball courts there years ago. The light poles are still there where these courts are located. So we have a full set of plans and drawings, et cetera. Jerry and his consultant will be here in 2 weeks.
All right. That's it. All right, so we're moving on to the General Commission business. Approval of the minutes from the December 19th, 2017. Did anyone have any issues? All right, I'm not hearing any. We'll file those. So that brings us to the purpose for the evening, the forest management discussion and workshop. And I want to thank you, Charles, for putting together. Do you like Charles or Chuck, or which do you prefer?
Charles, Chuck, Charlie, they're all fine to me.
All right. I have a brother-in-law. He's the same name, and same issue. So, thank you for putting those, taking a stab at that. And have you had a chance to read? All right. So, how are we going to, before we go, I suppose, let's see if we have any comments from the public. Do we have any comments from the public?
Yes, I do.
All right.
Thank you. I don't know why this is not working. Let me see why. Oh, I didn't set it right. Okay. Thank you. I don't have to hear myself, right? So I can just talk with you. Happy and healthy New Year, everybody. So, at the last meeting, we received about 3 documents that were put into the, and into your agenda, and then you were discussing it. Now I offer my comments. Maybe it's perceived after the fact, but maybe also after your discussion. And I will just sort of touch 3 points, basically. One will reference the framing of the goals. 2 will reference your discussion on definitions. And 3, I will talk about a little bit about how you discussed the issue of costs. So, catching my breath. Having read the 3 documents, Don, you said you didn't think you were a philosopher, but you are. I thought that you came out loud and clear with what you thought your philosophy should be. And I thought the definitions were very good and very worthwhile to be considering as we go forward. And on the issue of pragmatism, anytime, because I think it's important to have that in the conversation, no matter which conversation it is. Then, Mr. Haldeman, I appreciate you're good at thinking on your feet and thinking out loud with us, and you're also good at note-taking, which I find commendable. And I guess my comments, I took the one document that I took to speak to was the one that the chair presented, which was somewhat in a format, so therefore it was easy for me to speak off of that format. So, regarding the issue of goals, goals are the stated policy to guide those endowed with the stewardship responsibility of all our conserved lands. And goals should be, in my thinking, predicated on why parcels were conserved and should define their very nature. I'll speak to the definitions to accompany in a moment. Stewardship, I think, should be a goal. And stewardship is predicated on best practices derived from current scientific discovery. And I think it should be stated as such. Now, these goals are not going to speak just to this group. It's going to speak to any membership that makes up this group, or any discussion coming out of this discourse. So I think we have to keep that in mind as we speak to the goals themselves. So let's talk about that for just a moment. Let me get my notes.
Helen, can I grab your headphones?
I don't know why it's not.
Just feeding back. Don't worry.
I need all the help I can get.
I know, but if I turn it up too much, it just feeds back.
Oh, okay, so keep it there. Thank you. I would, looking at that particular document, I would reconsider the title specifically. For instance, I might suggest something that sounds like stewardship goals for conserved lands. And philosophy should define the historic landscape of our conserved lands and the purpose of conserving. Then as I looked at the goals as were listed here, I find number 1, number 2, number 3, I might add in the title of number 3 to add the word passive before recreational use. There are some words within these identifying remarks. And I would like to go back to the philosophy for a moment to note 2 places where the word management goals were used. Paragraph 2, line 2, and line 3. I would suggest that that word management at that point in the philosophy be changed to stewardship goals
Good idea.
rather than management. The last phrase in the second paragraph I found very good, very interesting. It talks about resilience against severe weather and changes in climate. I don't think enough conversation is taking place at the present time about that, and I'm assuming it will take place as we continue. Now to goal number 1, I see the word in the next to the last line, health of open space resources. Basically, the resource inventory speaks to how we inform ourselves as to the inherent value of each parcel, as to the unique characteristics of each. We need to know. At the very end of that paragraph, I would suggest, after the word monitor changes, that you add in the scientific approach. To goal 3, I would suggest that at the second to the last line in that paragraph where it mentions recreational, I would suggest passive recreational. As we go forward, I look at number 4, 5, and 6, and I see something that is a cross-reference here. I would take the title under number 5, and I would look at it, and I would say that it should read identification, preservation, enhancement, and then go back up to 4 and pick up number 1, biological diversity, number 2, habitat then back to number 5, number 3, wildlife corridors, because that's what those speak to. Number 6 specifically, I think, speaks to maybe a concern that comes to mind as we talk about, we hear so much concern about invasives. And maybe we can just add that as an attached piece of 4 and 5 and talk about being vigilant in monitoring of invasive plants. Now, in looking at those goals as they were listed, I'd like to go back and talk about the language that appeared under each of those and talk and use the term identification for definition, applying that word to this language. And talk to that second point that I mentioned that I would like to stress, and that is the importance of definitions. So, let me see where I've gone with this. Definitions are important, and they are important at the outset. And the reason I say that is that any discussion that goes forward after you've established the goals, it's part of the goals, because any discussion that follows thereafter into the next phase of your conversation, which should be to the tactics or whatever other term you want to use, how you go forward with the active look at how we define stewardship. Now, those definitions give us a basis from which we can speak. Those definitions, for instance, like sustainable, health, habitat connectivity, many of these words or terms are not readily recognized in general. Like I said, it's not just this group that is going to be looking and talking about this issue. That you're speaking to the future. You're establishing goals and definitions so that you can have an informed discussion. So, that was the second part of my comments. Now the third. I might even add another word here about the definitions and why they're necessary. I'd like to add the word academic in there, because not just informed discussion, but we really have to be sure to recognize how important it is for us to be, you, who are really into this subject, to really be ready to discuss things that make sense when it's in writing as well, not just when we're talking. So, stewardship is a goal. That should be, I think, a goal. So if you were to take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, put them together, you might come out with 5 or 6 goals in my thinking. But stewardship should be that one goal, because since it should be predicated on the best practices, as I said before, derived from current scientific discovery, it should be stated that way. It should be stated that way because those who come after you, those who are different to this discussion, need to understand. But this is a scientific issue. So, moving along now. Thank you for being patient, as I'm sure that I am. Okay. Now, just a few more comments regarding a caution that I'd like to bring to your attention. Caution to referencing goals as stated in a management plan draft is not the same as the goals that we are talking about for the town's look at our conserved lands. Those specific 8 goals that we see that we have been given in our 4 management plan drafts are important to that discussion at that next level where you're going to be talking more specifically about what that stewardship means. So I think those 8 goals are a wonderful point of reference and a jumping off point for that next level of discussion. I don't think they are as necessary to the first level of discussion about the general goals going into our conserved lands and their care. Now for that last comment that I would like to address, and that is, in your discussions, there was comment about money, costs, and so forth. I think it's very natural of us who are in this conversation, especially given past habits, past behavior of our town, be it the Finance Commission, be it anyone, we have those concerns. There may have been an unwillingness or an inability to fund the fund as it was directed in the ordinance. Now, this conversation takes place because we wear 2 hats. We're here on a board, on a commission, trying to create and establish policy. But each one of us still wears that other hat. We're the constituency. We're the ones who pay the bills. We're the ones that are going to have those concerns. And I think it's great that that conversation has taken place here because it gives an awareness. It raises an awareness. It raises the issue of how it's to be paid for. And it comes from inside of you where you care. Now, anytime you can have that discussion in a public forum, it's good. I'm not denying that. But it's not in your purview as a commission to discuss that. I only bring this up to caution that we don't allow that part of the conversation regarding costs to drive the discussion of our primary task of making policy. Now, let's put on that other hat. How can we address these concerns? Now, we can take our thoughts and our opinions regarding those costs directly to the administration where it can make a difference, because that's their purview. We can resolve to take it in person. We can resolve to take it in writing from the body of this commission. We can address those points and fund the fund. Encourage a line item in the yearly budget. Encourage, let's say, the public to know that it is a necessary thing we need to have happen and we need money. Maybe private donations could be encouraged. That's how we make that concern work. I can use an example. The Culture and Parks Board is a policy-making board. But they're not, taking on the burden of deciding how they're going to pay for it. Neither does the Planning Commission when talking and establishing the POCD. They may have those concerns, but that's not part of their purview. If there are costs that come along with anything that a policy dictates, that's the administration's job. It is our job as constituents to be there at that level, to be there at that point to discuss and to drive that discussion. Okay. I'd like to reiterate one more comment. Not only is it natural to have these conversations, let's just not let it drive the policy, nor should we allow it to drive the stewardship practices. Those come later. We'll have plenty of time to deliberate that. But that should not drive that discussion as well. So, thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Helen. Those were good
And
points.
I'll be happy to offer anything in writing that you think would be
That would be very helpful.
You don't want, I just got home Sunday night, you don't
Just-
want to look for these notes, but I can certainly
No.
provide you a better.
Yeah, that would be very helpful. Oh, did you have-
I'm John Schaefer, Lossbrook Road. I didn't get to your last meeting, but I watched it on SCTV, and I had a couple comments I wanted to make to that meeting. And I'm not sure what Helen's even going over here, but I may have missed something along in the process. But bear with me. During your meeting on December 19th, 2017, you struggled to determine forest management goals. I believe that your first step needs to be deciding on the town's forest management philosophy. Once you understand why the town wants to own these parcels and how they should be used, it will be easier to determine the goals. The goals from the existing management plans may help you in determining the town's goals, but you need to realize and keep in mind that the forest management plans and the goals within them were created by a forester whose overall philosophy is to maintain the forest in a way that maximizes periodic timber harvest. It has been stated that that is not how the town wishes to use these open spaces. These plans, created by the management plans that we have, do not address how to maintain the existing ecosystems or enhance the experience of users. A comment was made on the 19th that the forest management plans contain more information than is available elsewhere. A forest ecologist would be able to provide you with input from a very different point of view. They would be able to provide assistance in writing the philosophy and goals with which you are struggling. One point that was discussed on the 19th is how to address the cost of maintaining these forests as though they must be self-sustaining. I do not understand that concept. There are numerous parks and school grounds in town which are not self-sustaining. The day-to-day costs of these forests will probably be significantly less than for those other properties. Depending on the philosophy of the forest, improvements, quote unquote, may be minimal. The largest cost could be for erosion control and the removal of invasives, if that fits in the philosophy. Although the commission does need to be pragmatic in its decision-making, the source of maintenance funds is something that should be left to a town-wide discussion. I believe that the forest management philosophy should include allowing nature to see to the health of the forested open spaces. The forest will then provide generations of citizens with places of beauty and serenity.
Thank you very much. This is proving to be, this is not a task that we've had before to really come up with. As we've gone through it, we're sort of refining our thinking. Those are great, thank you for the comments.
Well, I thought this is what my profession is.
That's great,
And
yes, and I
it took
appreciate it.
me years and years. Many of the students that studied the process with me never did catch on.
Yeah,
I don't know how they got through their professional lives, but they
yes,
went on.
yes,
So it is difficult.
yeah. One of the things I was, from last meeting, I know we wrote up, we've been dealing with management plans, and I know the definitions are very critical. I like the term stewardship far more. One of the things with management, it implies that we know what we're doing, and I'm not quite sure, I'm convinced that we...
You don't think the same thing applies for stewardship?
Well, no, but it's a little, stewardship can also mean you just leave it alone, but a management, to me, but again, this gets to that definition. I have a problem with management, that we're managing those forests, and I'm not quite sure. That word does not, that definition is a hard one for me. So, I agree,
Okay.
I agree with Helen that, it's the, we're all coming from, different interpretations of different words. And if this is a document that we're going to be passing on to other people, they're going to come with their own ideas. And so it would behoove us to put down what our definitions are. But, to get to John's point, the philosophy. Why are we preserving these pieces of land? I don't think it's because the town wanted to get into forestry,
So,
timber harvest.
okay, so of all the stuff that I've heard so far, are we having a discussion now, or?
Sure,
Okay.
yes, this is very loose.
Of all the stuff I've heard so far, it's the thing we haven't really talked about is this concept of stating exactly why we're doing this task. Originally, when we talked about philosophy, it was the philosophy of how we're going to approach this plan, this management plan, or this stewardship plan, et cetera, because there were some things that revolved within that philosophy, but they were different from the goals. In the beginning, we weren't, I think we've heard a couple of these things. The idea of should be based on a scientific process, that there should be an inventory, those types of things you could put into the philosophy section. But what I heard today was an additional request, almost like a preamble. The reason we are doing this is because we've invested a lot of town resources into buying open space, and we haven't funded the maintenance of it. So now that we're thinking about, or maybe that's not in there, but now we're thinking about how do we do this stewardship well?
Yes.
And as a result of that preamble, we are proposing, this is how we are going to do this plan, which involves, X, Y, and Z. Here are our stated goals. And I would claim that a good set of goals are ones that should be able to be stated and we think would be valid for a long time period. Things that we think are going to change a lot should be in the tactics. And that's where the definitions probably belong, because we can believe that 5 years from now, whatever we're thinking about invasive control is going to change. That's probably going to change more rapidly than anything else. So I'm not sure that I would want to have in the goal section a lot of details about how we do invasives, but we could say invasive, an invasive management plan will be evaluated from a townwide perspective and in each parcel. Because I think that's a good philosophy statement, as opposed to, we will look at invasives only within this one parcel.
No, I don't think we can.
Well, and so that's why it kind of belongs in the
Yeah,
philosophy
that's
section,
good,
but so
So-
that was the pieces, that was what I've heard out of these two
Yeah,
conversations,
yeah.
that was new today. I think everything else falls in well to what we've been talking about.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting to see where we've come. I mean, we started off, we had 4 concrete forest management plans from a forester saying we've got to do this, this, and this, and this. We keep backing up to say, well, wait a minute, is that the only way to look at it? Should we be looking at it at parcel place? We've started to look at it more in a broader way, and then to start saying, well, are these terms that we're happy with? And I think we're getting there, but we started very, very focused, and now we're getting very broad. But I think that will be necessary to see where we want to go. Rather than that sort of tunnel vision we had for each of the plans, I think it's, we're getting there. The fact that we have to come up with a philosophy for that land before we come up with a plan, I think we're going in the right direction, although it seems very complicated and
I think
awkward.
we've been there relatively, we've been there for a while, I think.
Yes, we have. It's spinning.
John, did you have something?
Can I still get in it?
Yes, please.
I would suggest you take another step back from
Okay.
the town is invested in these properties and is now deciding what to do with it, to go back to why did the town purchase these properties?
Yes.
Now, I came into town just after we purchased the corner piece from Ethel Walker. I wasn't directly involved in that, but I was very involved in purchasing the large portion that was recently purchased in 3 phases. And I think if you went back and talked about the people who were involved in convincing the town to do that, and the people who gave the money, and the group, the Trust for Public Land, that came in and helped us. You need to go way back to then and see what were all those people intending in preserving this property? How were they seeing this property being used by the town?
So,
I had another caution that I forgot to mention, that as I read those 3 documents and as I listened to your discussion last meeting, the issue or the words forested lands, or we were talking about the forested lands, the goals should apply to any kind of parcel that we have in, let's say, in town. It should be, let's say, predicated on why we conserve these lands, and they should be defined, as you have already, as you did in your commentary under that heading. You know, those comments that you made, and that Don interjected, but all 3 of you, can be brought together and be made more concise. You know, editing is great because it really clears the head, and it allows a better informed conversation. So just consider my comments like editing a bit so that we can focus on the right things.
I think Helen's comments raise another question, and that is, the town is simultaneously engaging in an open space master plan. And there must be, somebody's got to have the ball here to run with it. There must be some sort of understanding on our part as to where we fit into that process, where leadership is being taken, whose finished product is the town finished product. One way of thinking about this is the Conservation Commission really working on fashioning its input to the consultant who's doing the open space master plan. You'll recall a couple of meetings back, I brought the message back from the open space committee that we were encouraged to comment to Jerry to help guide the request for proposals and what all towards fashioning that. But I don't think we can have several processes going along on the same project of the ultimate big picture from the town open space. We need to have some kind of way of putting these 2 together in a rational way.
but I would say that that's exactly what we're trying to do now, because as a group of 4 people or 6 people, we're trying to be able to state what we think as a conservation group is our philosophy and our goals should be on something that's close to 1 or 2 pages. And we would, if we could actually nail that down, then we could actually send it to the people working on the master plan and say, hey, this is what we're thinking about. What are you thinking about?
Then maybe we set aside the question of Onion Mountain, Belden Forest, and so forth, set all the nuts and bolts management plan stuff aside,
Yep.
and prepare a statement for the possible use by the folks doing the open space master plan for what we think is the wholesome, big picture view we should have, and set all the parcel level stuff aside altogether for the present.
And then, once we get that, then we can go back to look at the management plans. Do they now fit with the overall goals? I think that's a process that we've been slowly working towards. I think that's an excellent point, Don. Yeah.
I would layer upon that my comment from last week. The pragmatism, thank you, Helen, pragmatism has got to be essential to this. It will not work for us to, I think, my own view, to suggest to those who are working on the open space master plan that they cast a very wide analytical net on regional things and expect input from various other organizations and the like, because I don't honestly think they're going to get that. I think we need to get back to a philosophical level that is also bounded by what can rationally be achieved.
But I don't think we've gotten to that level of differentiation yet. I mean, I don't think we're having a discussion about philosophy or the goals yet that is saying, oh, we got 6 goals here, but these 2 seem to be really hard to implement, so maybe they belong someplace else. We're still cycling through on what we think the goals should be at a high level. I mean, I've heard, we have touched about some pragmatic reasons as in our conversations, but I don't think any of the goals that we've had in any of these 4 or 5 pieces have started to board on something that would be, where that would be a concern. I guess that's what I haven't seen that yet.
Well, in your philosophy paragraph, Charlie,
Sure.
it really framed in terms of the inventory process and gathering input from all sorts of sources.
Only, in my case, I was saying that, and you could rephrase that as being part of the scientific method, and I would always say, and what I was trying to get across is that we were going to do an inventory, we would do an inventory process, and we would evaluate whether that information is really valuable to us or not before we went and did it, so that it would be part of our thinking, that we would have this thing through some sort of inventory, but we wouldn't wait to have, we wouldn't get in a situation where we had to have a lot more detailed information. Just that we consider it.
You said that you can't consider management plans before before the inventory. Isn't that in here, or I got my documents mixed up?
So so that could have easily been, so my philosophy section, so can you tell me the sentence you're looking at?
I don't know.
Okay, overall goals will be established based on reasonable assessments of forest health and forest status and health. As there are many organizations at both the state and local level that impact forest and open space management, this process will gather input from a wide variety of sources, providing ample opportunity for public comment and review. Any long-term plan will provide a method for evaluation of effectiveness and ability to update the plan and will not constrain future decisions by the town. So my intent wasn't to claim that all this stuff has to be done, into some level of detail, just that would be the process by which we're looking at it.
Okay, I may have carried over a thought from last week, because I think perhaps Marjorie's document.
Well, I know last week we had that discussion too, Don, that I was saying, there is a lot of information we already have. And if there was a way of getting additional information about what the adjacent forest, what the plans were for that would help inform our decision. I didn't say it was an exhaustive yes, you could hold everything up until you had every last bit of detailed information. I don't think that's what we were saying. We were just saying whatever information we've got. I mean, I know we have, there's another Belden Woods forest management plan, I think. That one would also be interesting to see, and compare with the current Belden Woods.
Sure.
So looking at all the information we do have the wildlife databases, we do have the soils, we do have the streams, we do have a lot of information. We were talking last time about the GIS maps and the overlays and things like that. That information is available. That's the kind of information we were also talking about.
Which, in fairness, I think tends to be included. If you look at the Onion Mountain plan,
no.
it's all in there.
It's good, it's good. There's some things more that, but those are the things we need for whatever open space parcel we have. And it's just good practice to have an inventory of the information you have before you look at anything.
John, Charlie, there's the one question I want to ask you was, you refer in here a couple of times to the existing town forest plan and the overall town plan. I'm not familiar with an existing plan or an overall plan. Did I miss that?
No, that's probably a bad choice of words. So I'm looking exactly for,
Maybe that's what we're coming up with?
This is 3 lines from the bottom of your purpose paragraph,
oh, my,
found in the existing town forest plan.
so I'm looking,
And then in the middle of the philosophy paragraph, the overall town plan. I'm not familiar with those.
so I'm sorry, John, can you tell me where you're looking at the first one again? You said,
The first one is the 3rd line from the bottom of purpose.
oh, the purpose, okay.
Ideas found in the existing town forest plan.
The journals to be used in any planning process, the third line. Okay, found in the existing town forest plans, and I
Are
was,
these the management plans?
yeah, the management plans.
Oh, the management plan.
Yes.
Ah, all right.
And this purpose, by the way, was a note to the committee.
Understood. All
As to what I thought was going on and what this document was.
right, but then in the middle of philosophy.
Yep.
But will be consistent with the overall town plan.
Yeah, so I would say that would be, will value, so, bad choice of words again, but the Conservation Committee will evaluate Simsbury forest plans within a wider context of forest and open space use within Simsbury and the surrounding region in order to protect and maintain a healthy and diverse open space network through sustainable land stewardship. And that whole statement was what I was considered to be, would be considered to be this new plan that we're talking about.
You're talking about the philosophy.
Well, yeah.
Consistent with the philosophy.
Right, well, this would be consistent with the overall yet-to-be-determined town plan,
Or philosophy
or
goals.
philosophy.
Overall, yeah.
So as I was thinking about it, and so I agree with you, it's poorly worded, but for my philosophy, I was thinking that we got these individual town plans, and we're at town parcel management things, and we're now saying that we're gonna look at these things within this wider context of the overall town, and we might say the open space management plan as is now being considered, within that context. That's kind of what I meant, Don.
Okay,
And I think that there's a better choice of words to make that.
so the master plan.
Yeah.
The to-be-done master plan is what we're harmonizing with at that point.
Right,
Okay.
harmonizing with. And so when I was thinking about the philosophy statement, I was saying, the big part for me was, we're not gonna look at things as a parcel by itself. We're gonna look at it within this bigger context. And then we're gonna look at it from, an overall land stewardship perspective, ecological as opposed to just forest. And that we'd always provide a method to update the plan, our pieces. We'll have a method to evaluate its effectiveness, and that we will not constrain future decisions by the town. Those are the things that I thought were important, and I try to put them into the philosophy section. Because I think all the goals we've talked about can be echoed into that. Now, you might say, no, we want to constrain future decisions. And we can have a debate about that. But I was trying to spell it out very specifically, that these were the things that I thought, I've heard, and I thought were echoed by us in a lot of ways.
Thank you, that does clarify. I was pleased to hear Helen say that at such point as we get to looking at parcel by parcel decision-making, that the goals in the management plan are pretty good. Because Marjorie asked us to come to this meeting with kind of fleshing out these goals. So I took the Onion Mountain plan and I thought, all right, I'm going to look at these goals and I'm going to kind of work back through the plan and see how these goals are reflected in the themes in there. And every time I thought about adding some language, I decided it wasn't necessary. It was defeating the purpose. That these goals were pretty good and were reflected very adequately in the plan as we had it. And I point out that the first one is to engage in sound, sustainable land stewardship. So I don't think we're off beat.
No, I really, as I hear all the discussion, I don't think we're very far apart on most things.
I tried to look at the 3 goals that you had written up too, and they read to me that there were they were different from what's in the draft management plan, but really the same, kind of a
Well, they were a consolidation.
consolidation, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because one of the things, if you look at the draft plans, they basically say, oh, we're gonna deal with, the forest, then we're gonna deal with wildlife, then we're gonna deal with the water. It's like, nah, that's all the ecology.
It is,
And you can put it up into one section.
Can I offer a little historic perspective here? Just bear with me. I'm trying to put it all together. And I'm glad you brought up the master plan, Don, because you know what happens in a community like this? You've got these things going on simultaneously, in a parallel way. And you don't know which one has to be really ready for the next one to happen. And we just have to be sure not to rush so that we don't do it wrong. I have two other comments. The master plan, to me, means it has to do with management. That's what drove the idea of having one, because we have, unfortunately, only one staff, and they are being asked, and sometimes I think they're being asked to do something we shouldn't ask them to do. The master plan, I don't want to bring that into the conversation anymore, other than to say, it's not even decided yet whether there will be one master plan to cover both parks and rec lands and open space passive lands, passive use lands. Some of us think that they should be two, because they don't jive, they don't mix. If you have to bring together below that umbrella, after you have a master plan for each, which I think is how you take care of them, then you come below that and bring it to bear how staff will help accomplish it, how the budget can be driven for that purpose. So other than that, I don't want to have, encourage, let's say, a master plan discussion right now, but it is there, and I'm glad you brought it up, because pragmatism, this is good. I still say, we're still talking a little bit cross-referencing here with the information that we have about the forest lands. We've got to stay more generic, I think, to the purpose of creating these goals as they should be applied to all our conserved lands. I think that's what the Conservation Commission, I think that's the mission that you have, if I understand it correctly. You don't speak to the parks and rec lands. That comes to you under your regulatory hat. They do come to you often because of what they want to do in these parcels. And so they come to you in your regulatory, under that hat. So I'm just wanting to clarify.
But Mrs. Peterson, if I go back and I look at Marjorie's goals, and there's 6 of them here, I don't see any of these goals as being specific to forestry. I see them all being, they could be, they're very general enough. They're general enough that they could be used everywhere.
Correct. And I think it's just that the forest lands keep creeping into our conversation. And I'm just trying to say, let's be sure that we are understanding, even in your conversations, your discussion, that this
And that's probably,
task
that's
of goals
probably,
should cover the umbrella.
yeah, that's probably because that's what we were tasked with first, is to look at
I
the
know,
management, the
that makes
forest management
sense.
plan.
That's what was put on your
Yeah,
desk
that's-
before
yeah,
you first.
I just add to what you're saying, that I think Don made a very good point in that, and as Helen was emphasizing, if you don't get ahead of this horse, we're gonna have a management plan that's gonna be putting parking lots everywhere and paving paths and everything and putting up jungle gyms or whatever on every piece of property the town owns. But you need to go back to the inventory that was done. That inventory was all conserved land, right? Didn't contain any parks and rec land.
Everything that's classed as open space included the golf course and
Oh,
everything.
well,
It
so,
includes little circles at the end of cul-de-sacs.
right. Now,
Everything.
I don't understand all the jurisdiction of this, but whatever comes under your purview, is what you should be talking about. There should be some sort of overall philosophy. Maybe the umbrella thing is Simsbury cherishes its open space, green space, and it should be preserved as much as it can. But then underneath that, maybe there's a thing of, well, this green space in a cul-de-sac, we don't need, but the neighbors in that cul-de-sac are gonna go up in arms. So you say, well, okay, we're gonna keep that. And then maybe there's another parcel that's the town came into because it was part of a development, and the developer handed it over to the town, and it's a large critical wetland or something, or ephemeral pool or something, where you say, well, okay, well, this is of value to the town, you know, that's another sub-part of the philosophy. And then you would eventually work your way down to the forest open space that we've all sort of been concentrating on, and that's gonna have another sub-task of this umbrella philosophy. And you need to set those before you start setting goals, because if we're talking about the cul-de-sac, that's a whole different set of goals, potentially, than the forest.
If we try to expand this to include all of the open space in town, I mean, don't we end up having to, you know, establish a philosophy and almost, you know, start the direction for goals for all of these other parcels as well, for the golf course and for,
Yes.
you know,
That's what I'm
for
saying.
parks, right?
I'm not sure about jurisdictions and what your purview is.
Let's talk
It
about
sounds as though that's
jurisdiction,
what it is.
John, because
Pardon?
jurisdiction comes from the Latin to speak the law, right?
Right.
And as Conservation Commission, we do not speak the law ever. About the only statutory responsibility we have as I didn't pack my statute this evening, Michael correct me, but I think our only statutory obligation is to inventory open space, or inventory, not even open space, inventory conservation values in town. That's our only responsibility. Everything else is advisory, and I believe the statute says that we advise other boards on changes in land use.
What was that word?
Boards and commissions
Boards, thank you.
on changes in land use. So, you know, to the extent that we are crafting philosophy, we're in that another region where we can kind of do other stuff, but we're really off the reservation a little bit. It's not the sort of thing that those who framed the Conservation Commission statute really had in mind. So the inventorying, absolutely right in our strike zone, and truth be told, we have never done it.
No.
We ducked it, I wasn't around then, but it was ducked years ago when the commission made use of the Farmington Valley Biodiversity Project.
Yeah.
Howard Beach was one of the inventors of that project, and sort of the commission sort of took credit for that work on the town's behalf as being sort of an and it was indeed an inventory of natural resources. But that's the only inventorying we have ever done.
So,
You know, I have to say that I
Excuse
would
me, I
like
just
to,
stand corrected then. I shouldn't use jurisdiction. I should have said statutorily charged with or something like that. I don't understand what all this structure is. It seems as though it's not.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is we have.
Maybe what I'm saying is you should be developing a philosophy to recommend to somebody who
Yeah.
has something else, unless the board or this commission decides that you don't want to get into it. I don't know, but somehow you were asked to look at these 4 plans. and
We have been
make
asked
revised-
really only to look at the Onion Mountain plan, specifically that.
Is that right?
Yes, that was we approved it unanimously a year and a half ago, something like that, 2 years ago,
Like
approved
I
what?
think 2.5 now.
2.5 years ago, well, the time flies. And we were asked to review that decision affirm it or not. And that was the stepping off point for this process.
By
But
the
it was
Board of Selectmen?
by the Open Space Committee, which was presided over by the first select woman,
Okay.
which would, and presumably it would then, had this commission recommended going forward with that plan or revision of it, it would then have gone to the Board of Selectmen for action if they chose to do so. So we, we're only in an advisory role here, and what we're doing is framing, how we will go about crafting our advice.
That's exactly right. We're trying to consolidate our advice down this lane that can be actionable, we can pass on to somebody else to describe it relatively distinctly. And so I think, at least in my view, we have to think about all these things. We need to try to consolidate it down to the essence of what we're trying to get across that will last a while. If it has a lot of detail in it, you're going to lose the main messages. Not that that can't be someplace else, and we try to separate, so when we talk about that in the tactics, we'll get around to that and talk about it. But I really think that you can consolidate the goals and the philosophy of what we're trying to do into something that's, 1 or 2 pages. I think if it gets much longer than that, then we aren't doing
But
it.
Yeah, and-
I'm sorry, but on the other hand, I also think that it's beneficial to flesh out, I know we said, these goals are pretty good, but I do take exception with number 8, where it says generate periodic income from the sale. I don't know that that's a goal.
So we're not talking about the we're not talking about the
but
master
that's
plans.
what we had this discussion last time, that we need to come back, we need to, these were pretty good, and I know you just said that these were pretty good, the goals for the management plans, and they're the same for each of the 4 management plans. So we were having problems with some of the definitions and trying to figure out how it fit into our overall goals, and do these goals match with the other?
Right,
So-
and a long time ago, like 8 meetings ago, we all looked at that and we all said, this is probably the one that we're gonna have the most problems with, and we all said, we don't think it should just be a forest, we think it should be an ecological
Yeah.
thing.
And
we've kind of zeroed in on that.
And I did have a problem with, and last time I mentioned I had the problem with number 1, which engage in sound, sustainable land stewardship. The sustainability does imply, in a forest management sort of way, that you're going to be harvesting that forest for timber.
It does?
In a forest management, it does.
I don't think so.
There is an if you look at the definition for forest management, sustainable forest management, it does imply sort of a continuing harvesting in a sustainable way, that you're going to be generating more of that timber. If it's used for land stewardship, it's a different thing, and it does say land stewardship.
Yeah, well, that's why I like the,
But I think definitions are key here.
Yeah, that's why I liked what, especially what Charles had done
Yes.
here, just expanding on what those goals mean.
That's
I
what,
think if we can
and
explain
that's what we were talking about
what we mean
last
by
time.
sustainability,
Yeah.
then, then I don't think it has to
No,
have that
no.
connotation.
No, but, I spent some time on the internet and looked at forest, sustainability, and it's all over it. There's an economic component to it, which I don't want that to be, since that is present on the internet and all the definitions, I wanted to, find a different word for that.
I think
And
that,
I think-
I think that all comes through in the tactics.
It does. It does, yeah.
And so I think if we can go back to, we've got about 10 versions of these goals floating around. We're at the point where we're not adding a lot of new information. We're just trying to organize it. I would put forward that we know we kind of got it nailed when we've got it to the essence. Things that are definitions or things that look like they might change over time, they should be someplace else.
Yeah.
And that we should get this so that we could say, at the end, our board thinks this is where we're headed. You could send it off as an interim report to the management and say, this is where we're headed, and we're going to do the next step. But in all the talk we've had, I haven't really heard a lot of new stuff, so I think we're close.
Yeah, and I think some of Helen's suggestions, like adding passive recreation,
But
but
see,
those are-
well, see, I would disagree with that
all right,
because,
you want to put that in the tactics,
because I think that that's at an individual parcel level.
all right.
I think that I think if you go back to mine, to my perspective, which I said, the second goal is provide suitable recreational opportunities consistent with the conservation goals outlined previously.
Good, yep.
And that just means that we will evaluate recreational opportunities, but we're.
In context of the.
In the context of the parcels and the overall plan.
Yep.
It's not that it has to be passive. We have stated up in the front that we're going to conserve soil, water, cultural resources while improving the forest, ecosystem health, and wildlife habitat.
Sounds good.
And so, and while we're doing that, we're going to provide suitable recreational activities, and we're going to maintain, the third one is maintain special or sensitive areas as reserves implying very low human impact as required for a specific plan set aside in goal 1 for either land or wildlife needs. When I broke these things down, those are the 3 main points I saw. And I think once you're at those goal levels, everything else becomes a tactic. How will you achieve that?
Good.
And there isn't anything about these that I suspect is going to change over time.
No,
I think you could distill that all down into one paragraph,
Yes.
and it would be a matter that we wouldn't have much to disagree about.
I agree.
I don't know that it gets us one step closer to being able to handle the Onion Mountain Plan, however.
Okay, so I'm going to agree with you that you can get this whole thing down to a paragraph. I'm at a page. You know, if you get rid of my commentary, I'm down to 1 page. Philosophy, and here are the 3 goals. I think you could rewrite it as even tighter, you know, with the bullet points you can put out. So the question is, once we have that, how would we, and it kind of looks like some combination of Marjorie's and my stuff. Now we're going to go back through and look at the Onion Mountain Plan. And I would say that if you look at these 3 goals, the thing that kind of jumps out at you from the Onion Mountain Plan is, what do we feel is the appropriate recreational opportunities for Onion Mountain Plan? We know that we want to consider Onion Mountain Plan in conjunction with the 3 others, because that's part of our philosophy. So is there a particular reason to think that, you know, we've talked, they've done a great job of inventorying Onion Mountain, and they said, hey, you could get some revenue by the trees here if you needed to, but do we really want to upgrade a lot of the parking lots, et cetera? We need to look at the other 3 plans to say what that might be. I think it's all consistent with this. And you could basically go through and say, yeah, pages 3 through 80 are really great inventories, but we're missing the inventory for this part of the ecological thing. We should go out and have that review done. Or someone should go out and take a look at it. Can we add to it? I think you could use all this to zero in on where you want to do.
Missing parts.
The missing parts, or things you want a little bit more information on. And in fact, I would advocate that once we kind of get this thing down to 1 page, and maybe we're gonna work and clean it up, that the next thing we should do is talk about specifically that. Someone should go back and say, this is what I think is the missing parts. Come and talk to us about the next time. One of us could talk about what do we think the invasive controls are. I don't remember the invasives having a lot of discussion about their invasive control for the Onion Mountain Plan. I think it's another open area that we could deal with.
I like that. I like that plan. It also gets us to thinking about, you know, is it really, you know, I mean, I look at these plans and I see that number 8 is a big component of these plans. So, you know, I'd like to go back.
It's a big component because the forester has made a judgment, speaking only of the Onion Mountain case, that cutting should be done in order to create appropriate canopy openings to foster succession. That judgment is made. And the going in assumption, and perhaps it's an incorrect one, has been that the only way to pay for that cutting is to sell some wood. I disagree entirely with John. When John says that the objective is to provide periodic timber harvest, I do not agree, John, that that's the motivation of the plan. I've never heard the town say that. I've never heard the forester say that. My reading of this and the people involved has been throughout that there's a perceived need for cutting to achieve the continuing evolution of the forest towards the desired end, towards big trees, towards woody debris, high and low, and so forth. But the only way that has been known thus far to pay for it in the town is by selling wood. If it is correct, as Helen seems to believe, and I believe you advocate as well, Marjorie, that people have to be convinced otherwise, that's fine. But historically, to this point, the only perceived way to do the cutting, which is judged to be needed for the continued forest health, it has been to sell the wood.
I first of all think the Onion Mountain Plan should not be part of our discussion tonight about goals. However, since you brought it up, in the last year or so, I read through the minutes of the Conservation Commission going back to 2011, all of them. I read the minutes of the Open Space Committee going back to 2012 so far. And I have copious notes, and I found a common thread. I found a lot of good information. So, I speak as someone from the past, I speak as someone from the present, and I'm speaking to the future, those people who are going to replace you someday. And that's where the goals come in. That's why they are important. They have to address those 4 or 5 cogent points that gives them the direction from which to develop their conversations. They have to have something to develop their conversations. And when you speak specifically about the RFP, I went back and I found the original RFP. And the RFP itself that went out to the foresters, economically, it is intended that sufficient revenue be generated through a closely monitored tree harvesting program to pay for the management plan, as well as other improvements to the area. So there was the other intent there, why the forester wrote it up that way, why he did that, because that was he was directed to do. So let's have that conversation at another time, if we could, possibly. I just think we need to really address how this commission sends forward some way to fashion future discussions, and that's what goals should do.
I think that's a very good point, yeah. Yes.
Just to what Don was saying, is that it's been a while since I read the management plans, and I thought I had copies of them, but I couldn't find them anywhere. But my understanding was that the forester recommended that the management plan be redone every 10 years, and that the philosophy behind that is that he would then find other areas where there should be openings to create succession, and therefore he'd recommend cutting in another area, and that would continue around through the forest. And that was typical of the forest management plans that I researched, that I saw when I was researching online, like in Pennsylvania and all that. That seemed to be the philosophy, is you didn't want to come in and go through the whole forest, do it all at one time. You did a little bit here, you did this section here. 10 years later, you came back, you studied, and you said, okay, now let's move over to this section. 10 years later, you came back, you go, well, now we move over to this section. So that's why I'm referring to it as periodic.
Yeah, no, I mean, I read the draft plan too, as the harvesting being driven by the desire to improve the forest health.
Forest quality, so it was one procedure for how to achieve sort of an older growth forest characteristic, and it's using a more active management approach. It may be, it's not a clear cutting system, but it's like, oh yeah, we're going to keep fooling with it a little bit all the time, over time. And we had a bunch of debates earlier about, that's one philosophy. Yeah. You can let the forest do it by itself, which is another philosophy to achieve the same goals. And I think, I'm sorry, I'm missing my words. One's a tactic, and the other one's another tactic to achieve the same goals, which is an improved health of the forest.
Yeah, I don't know. I was thinking about that when I was thinking about the goals in the draft management plan. A couple of them were, like, number 6 is maintain and improve forest and ecosystem health.
Right,
And then number 7 was to protect and enhance diverse wildlife habitat.
right.
And those goals, to me, read as advocating for a more active management strategy, right? And if we're engaging the sorts of selective harvesting of trees to improve the forest health and
No, sorry.
creation of snags and.
Well, no, see, I don't make that jump. So read them again. Read them again, just. I don't-
Maintain and improve
Maintain.
forest and ecosystem
So,
health.
so the question is whether improve, in your mind, improve means an active piece, and I would say as a tactic, I can improve it through a scientific method and through inventory, but I have a method that says if I let the forest alone, it will improve by itself. And so I can get to both of those goals, but I don't have to make the jump that the tactic has to be active. And when I wrote my goals, I said conserve soil, water, and cultural resources while improving forest, ecosystem health, and wildlife habitat. And I would claim that now we can have a nice debate about what's the right tactic to do that. Do you
Yes.
want to go in and do a little bit of tweaking, or does this particular parcel need more tweaking because there's a lot of disease in it, but this other one we're going to let go? I don't see that I do not see this as saying it has to be an active man-made management system. At
That's
least I
why
wasn't trying to do that.
That's why I said, Charles, that I don't think it has advanced the ball at all in terms of our ability. Having the philosophy, which I think is there, doesn't really inform our consideration of the Onion Mountain Plan.
No, but the discussions we've been having, I think, do inform our discussion, because we are, when we first got this, all right, fine, this is the way we have to do it, and, it's sure, we'll go ahead with it. And I think that was our strategy, our decision a few years ago. But now we're sort of like, wait a minute, is that the only way to do it? And I think we've had a lot of discussion saying that, no, that might not be the only way to do it. And then that will then, inform the future discussions, what tactics will be good
Right.
to achieve the goals that we want.
So Don, that would be, I completely agree with you. Everything we're saying here is not dramatically changing our interpretation of the goals as stated by the Onion Mountain Plan. But I do believe, because we've separated things into these kind of different categories, once we agree to what we think the philosophy is and what's common to that, what's in these goals, then we can go back and look specifically at the tactics that are described in great detail and say, where might there be other tactics if you're doing it from an ecological perspective instead of a forestry, or if we're not worrying as much about, if we're looking at not just a single parcel, but the parcel within the larger context of our open space or our overall space community. I think that's where the tactics start to change. The only reason to even go down this philosophy goal section and tactics section was, 7 meetings ago, we were swirling around with one person talking at the philosophy level, another person talking at tactics, and then we'd cycle back to some goals. And we were going to be in a do loop for a really long time at that rate. It could all, like you say, this whole front part of it can disappear once we've consolidated our thoughts down to like a nice paragraph.
I wouldn't concern with, a page, a paragraph, whatever,
Yeah.
as long as we've got our thoughts down. Clearly.
And so I kind of agree with Don, very much that, boy, I'm really chewing my words up now. I agree with Don a lot that that once we've gotten this a little bit tighter in our heads, you can consolidate these goals. And I've already gone from 6 to 3.
That's good.
And I think that everything you had is put into this section.
Yeah.
I think once we're done with this, and we all kind of, think, it doesn't have to be perfect now. It can sit here as a straw man, and we can start to do the more detailed work, and then come back to it and say, yeah, does this really work for us, or is there something that's missing?
We come back, if we've got nice philosophy we're comfortable with, feels right to us. We pick up the Onion Mountain Plan. We have 2 major hurdles. The first hurdle is somebody's got to make a decision as to whether we believe in active management or not. That's kind of a watershed thing that, you know, that's just kind of hanging out there,
Yes.
that this discussion has not driven us on one side or the other of that question. That question is still there, virgin territory. And then the other issue is the question, the practical question of whether cutting is, if you go with active management, which implies some cutting, do you have to sell timber in a commercial way to pay for it? And I don't know.
Or as our discussion was earlier, do we have to have a discussion on a town level or on a commission level to say there needs to be a line item for management of open space?
Well, that's the question I was about to raise.
Rather than selling, I mean, otherwise it's sort of like, you know, saying, well, the golf course doesn't pay for itself, so we should turn it into a sod farm and sell the grass in order to pay for the golf course.
Well,
I
in
mean,
fact, the
you
golf
might-
course, I think, is supposed to pay for itself. That was
But
the-
if it didn't, or if the soccer fields don't, we'll turn them into sod.
Right, but
I mean,
so that was the
you know,
question I was
there is-
about to
there is a-
raise.
There is a philosophical thing. Do we really, if nature's done this before, and they've turned, you know, areas with young trees over a longer period of time into older, you know, strong trees, you know, do we need to go in? I mean, this is a philosophical thing. Do we really need to go in there and chop down these things in order to speed it up if we don't have the money to do it?
Okay, then you're back on the first question, and that's to
No,
be
no.
resolved.
I mean, these
And
are
if
tactics.
it's resolved that active management is needed, then you get to the financial question. And my question I was going to ask is, what do we do about that? I mean,
Well, that's-
is there a
that's
source of wisdom, is there a decision, is there a policy?
No.
We can't really answer the Onion Mountain question. If indeed we conclude we wish to have active management, we can't answer the question really unless we know whether the cutting is a financial necessity or not.
No, I would say no. I would say, we can say, we, for the health of the forest, we would say, if we feel that's the only way we can do it, that the cutting is necessary. If the cutting is necessary, then I think as a Conservation Commission, we should be talking to the Board of Selectmen, Finance, or whichever planning, or whichever group, and saying, we feel, you know, it's got really nothing to do with the amount of money we get from the timber harvest. If it's necessary for the health of the forest, then that becomes a town decision that they want to maintain that health of the forest and find money and make it a line item in the budget.
And if they say no,
Well, then nature will take care of it anyway. It'll be a passive administration, passive management.
I still say, let's not talk about the Onion Mountain Management Plan yet. I know exactly where it belongs in my thinking. It belongs at that next level of conversation, where you're going to talk about tactics and where you're
Yeah.
going to talk about that kind of thing. That's where that conversation belongs.
Why don't we figure
I
out,
think that you have right now, I don't have privy to read the new documents that we got tonight. So I think that looking at what I read from the last meeting, possibly coupling it together with what you have produced tonight, you are going to be able to have those goals in place. That will give you the opportunity to have an informed discussion, because the goals frame how those discussions will take place, period. That's all they should do, for you and for future members of this commission. So I'm saying, just stick to what you have really worked so hard on, and let's see if, you know, we can produce that hard copy by pulling it together.
Yeah, if I can, I mean, I think that's why it's important for us to talk through what the goals mean when we say certain things. So, I mean, when I read a goal is to, you know, enhance the diversity of the habitat, you know, I mean, I read that to be a more active management strategy. And
You know, Jim, last time at the last meeting, refresh my memory, but I think I remember hearing you say specifically, does this fit into those 8, something you were talking about? You referred to those 8 goals. And you said, does this fit into that? This is why I'm saying to you, that conversation will take place. And it is where you should go with it, is to go to those goals and then flesh them out. You might need a peer review, you might just need to just make a decision to say, we need this to happen, and take it to the Board of Selectmen and say, we need this to happen for us before we can have an answer for you. It's just a part of the process.
My other thought that I had too was, with respect to the financial piece, I wonder if we shouldn't have end up with with a list of priorities that we would like to see, at each of these forests.
Well, but that's again in the, if you come back to the philosophy section, the Conservation Commission will evaluate Simsbury forest plans within a wider context of the forest and open space use within Simsbury in order to protect, maintain healthy and diverse open space network through sustainable land stewardship. So now, immediately, when you go into each parcel, you will generate some priorities on that parcel within this larger context. So I think, yes, we will achieve all that, but this philosophy is telling you kind of how you're going to do it, and then these are the three main goals. And I guess the question I had for you, Jim, was, sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, well, I was just going to say that's by prioritizing what we want to see happen at each of these forested pieces, that could be a way of sort of sidestepping the financial question, because when we talk about if one goal is to control invasive species, you could throw millions of dollars at controlling invasive species, or you could say here's our priority list. We recognize that the town is not going to spend millions of dollars. If they did, that would be terrific, but maybe we prioritize these things.
Right. So the thing I was going to ask you, Jim, and it goes along with that thought, was, being an engineer, I wrote things in a bullet format, bold, one line, and then I wrote essentially a paragraph to explain it in a little bit more detail. And so the question I have is, you go to item 1, which is conserve soil, water, blah, 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 and then if you read the paragraph that comes after it, is that enough definition for you to understand the goal at that level, or is it missing pieces? Like the area right behind, where it starts off with the focus of the conservation planning efforts, and it goes down to that bracket, which talks about how I put it together. Is there enough, because you were saying that, when somebody just has a few words in there, you're left thinking maybe this is active management, and I've tried to bridge that.
One of the things, looking at that, when it says we want to achieve variable age groups, it may be that we don't want to achieve variable age group in one particular parcel,
Right, so
but throughout Simsbury.
I.
And it might not be on our particular parcel that they have the young forest.
I'm good with that, so
Yeah.
I was trying to channel
Yeah.
Dawn.
Yeah.
Because I had in there originally old growth characteristics,
Yeah.
and I'm like, okay, look, Dawn had a really good example why we shouldn't be using those words. And so I went through and I tried to put in what the main characteristic was, but I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
I think we're at a good level of detail, like if this is the word that we want to fix or get rid of it,
No, I agree.
that's great.
Yeah, I mean, I like it. I'm happy with it. I think we need to move on to tactics.
Well, no, I think what we need to do is, we need to figure out how we're gonna get from yours or mine or whatever, and get into something that we can say, yeah, this is the thing we're gonna use for a while. We need to put this football over that end line, and then we can go on the tactics. Otherwise, we will
All right, well,
lose.
why don't you, how about if I know Helen had some comments, John had some comments, if you could look at it again, thank you for
I was
doing
gonna
it.
suggest Dawn look at it.
All right, Don?
You want me to boil this down to the one paragraph I was looking for?
No, I don't think it needs to be one paragraph.
Since I've written it, it would, at least this version, it'd be good to have somebody else look at it and try to reconsolidate the thoughts. It'd be nice to get it, and this is just, so it'd be great to have it as a paragraph. I think that's fine. As an engineer, I like something where I can say I have 3 bullet points and I have another level of detail, but rest of the people don't think that way, and that's good. But I think if we could take that one next shot and come back and say, yes, we're gonna wordsmith this.
All right.
That would be great, and then we have the tactic
But I
discussion.
want to caution about having it boiled down to one paragraph, because then you're getting very close to the 8 points, and there's a lot of information I think will get lost.
But I don't think Don will do that.
Good.
There's a lot of stuff in here I would lose.
Well,
To be completely forthright about it, the talk about higher impact activities, the talk about a town committee to be designated, I didn't know what that was about.
a town committee to be designated, did I use that word?
Yes, that's in the second paragraph on the second page. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Oh, no, the inventory and planning process will be reviewed by town committees as designated by the selectman or town manager on a regular basis. So I wasn't sure which committees, I wasn't sure if it was going to open space committee or the conservation committee, because I think that cycles in over time. So that was what I intended to, that was the purpose of it, but again, you could.
It's a tactic.
Okay, good point. You could pull it out. I was gonna say it's a philosophy in that the inventory and planning process will be, this is the regular review process. Not, I'm saying which committee's gonna do it, I'm just saying it was gonna be done, but I'm fine with that. I would say, so the task I would put before people is to take something like this, or take Marjorie's stuff, consolidate again, look for words that are bugging you, and then if somebody wants to then take this and consolidate it down one more level, I would think that'd be good. And if we could come back and work with that on the next time, and it could be, I was thinking of Don, obviously, because he's so good at this kind of stuff, but we could all do it.
I'll do it.
Is the goal of this, is this paragraph going to be like a summary of the goals for the town? Is that what the idea is?
No,
Or is it?
I think it's a summary of the goal. I think the current goals are to describe how we will evaluate the forest plans. So if you go back to the philosophy statement, which says we're going to evaluate Simsbury forest plans within the wider context of the open space. And that basically tells us right up front that we can look at Belden, not Belden, we can look at Onion Mountain very specifically to find some holes in it, but we won't be able to make a really good issue about that until we go and look at the other 3, or the other 5, or whatever else we need to do. Which goes right back to some of the tactics we had before. But I think that these goals, and the ones that Marjorie had also, are high enough level that they can apply to everything. It passes the test we've all talked about. Can it be applied to the forest and open space? Yes. Is it not changing with time? Yes. Does it tell us how we'll do the evaluations? Yes, but doesn't describe any of the tactics, except for maybe the one thing about who's going to do the review process. And I'll definitely yield on that. We can take some of that out. But I think we're close. You're not thinking that, Don.
Well, it's all, I still think it's all fine, but it's all kind of ethereal. And when we pick up the Onion Mountain plan to look at that, to make some decisions, it doesn't really guide us in any way that's different from what we already have. And it punts entirely on the question of active management or not.
You know, I have to speak, I have to say something. Goals can be set, but goals can be changed. You know, it's not written in stone. And Onion Mountain Plan, I think, from your perspective, could be used as a test case against how it relates under these, let's say, original goals that you're establishing. It could be a test opportunity and how it measures up, how these measure up to the task. So I'm still saying you've got to really concentrate on these goals as they will inform the next level of conversation. You should not put, I think, in your philosophy, the word forest plans. That should not be in there. I think that there's some cleaning up to do, but like you say, Mr. Haldeman, you're close, but just stick to that task, and I think you'll be all right.
I don't think I disagree, Helen, but I guess what I'm saying is, the Onion Mountain thing, you said the Onion Mountain plan could be a measure of the satisfactory nature of the goals. I guess that's what I'm saying. Here's the Onion Mountain, which is the task we've been assigned, and I don't think that the goals, as summarized to be distilled in the philosophy, really get us to be able to deal with Onion Mountain in a way that is different than we could have 6 months ago.
I will agree with you.
Then they'll fail.
Well, no.
Start again.
No, I will agree with your statement, because at the very base level, we had to have a discussion about tactics. I think the two things that you brought up, which is like how we're gonna make a decision about active versus passive management, there's some education needs to be done. The reason we're summarizing these things now is because our thoughts were muddled for a long time. And we were talking about those tactics in some of the pieces, but other times people were talking about the philosophy or the goals. I think at the first thing I wrote, I said that, look, here's a way to organize it. We may toss all this out once we get done with thinking about it. And I think that's exactly where you're at. We'll summarize these things, and yeah, it's like all embedded in this stuff already, but it has helped us focus our conversation down to the point where we can actually get something to can zero in on what's a tactic. Somebody comes back and says, well, I want to talk about, the philosophy of old growth forest. We can say, well, that's over here, and we kind of done that. Is that changing anything? No, not really. Great, let's talk about the tactics of how we achieve that. That's all I think it is. And that's all I think, at least, and I also said, this was not the only way to organize it. You could have organized it a zillion other ways. It was just one way to help us to get through each of these steps. And I agree with you, Don. We're at the point where once we get it written down, we're ready for the next step. And all I'm interested in doing is figuring out how we actually can close off that little step for a while. So if we don't need to write anything else, maybe we're all set.
You mean the next step to go to tactics?
Yeah, next step to go to tactics. So that's really what we want to get to. We want to get to that part, to evaluate the Onion Mountain plan.
2 points, if I could make them. One was James, you brought up about, I believe it was point 6, and the discussion went on to say that was implying active management. And I just want to ask you to please remember what Helen pointed out, go back to the RFP and see what the consultants were charged with. The RFP only looked at half of the potential consultants. They left out the scientific, conservative side, the people like Helen brought to the talk. I don't know what you call that. The talk that we had.
The forum, you mean?
The forum. So the RFP was pretty narrow and specific, and that type of person who would provide a active management plan replied and got hired and prepared such a plan. So it's just have to look at that and make sure you understand that bias. The other thing was that in the fall I went on a tour of the NDC dam, which Don happened to be on the same one, and they took us to the dam, and then they took us up the west side of the lake and down in one of the service roads down in by the lake and all along and through that area. And there were 2 people there. One of them was the forester. I believe he was MDC's the forester. Didn't sound like they had a lot of staff. And he was explaining to us as we first left the road and went down this service road that the area to the south of the service road had just been managed, harvested that year. And their whole point is to create new growth because they feel that protects the reservoir. To the north of the road was an area that they had done, I'm pretty sure it was 4 years ago. And what they ran into was that there were moose there and a large population of deer. And the deer had come in and just cleared everything out of there except for black birch. So he was saying this was a big problem for them because they didn't want a monoculture of plants. So so they had, while we were in there, they were allowing hunters who had been selected, deer hunters, to go in and survey the area, and I believe they were coming back the next weekend or something to actually hunt, to try to lower the deer population. So I just want to point that out to you, that all of this stuff that's in those 4 management plans sounds good, but in actuality may not work according to the school book theory.
John, they were basically clear-cutting patches.
Yeah,
And the Onion Mountain thing was, the trees are actually blazed for cutting.
right.
And I went out and walked that land and looked at the trees, and it's not an analogous case at all. He was very specifically selecting trees that were, and I led a hike through there. And the people, I think, were uniformly amazed at how far apart the blazes were, that they were the tree there and there. Oh, and there's one over there. It was a very surgical cut was being prescribed for Onion Mountain.
I would beg to differ with you in one area. As you go in the trail to the south, where the trail sort of bore off to the north, if you walked over down through there, it would look like an ephemeral pool and all was over in that area. There were more in that area. But I agree with you. What they had done at MDC was more on the case of what happened at Toll Meadow, where they just essentially clear-cut it, except they left a few pole trees here and there. But my point that I think does apply to both is that the plans talk about clearing these openings for succession growth. And I'm just pointing out that MDC found out was they did that, assuming they're gonna have succession growth, and they didn't get what they wanted. They got a monoculture of black birch. So,
We did provide, in this commission's comments on the Onion Mountain plan, when you did approve it, we did provide for some deer exclosures.
deer what?
Deer exclosures,
Oh,
to deal with that very problem.
And it might be that, I'll have to look again at the plan, but oftentimes when you make those openings, you also get more invasives, so that's always the downside, so.
yeah, that's my point, is that it sounds good in theory, but there are other possibilities. And I don't think the town exclusions might work, but I don't think the town's gonna be interested in doing what NDC is doing, allowing hunting on those small parcels. I don't think that would go over with anybody.
All right. So next time, we'll look at this. If there are any words, we'll look at them for next time. But in the meantime, if people want to start coming up with tactics, start working on it.
Okay, so the action items are for us to go back and look
Do
at,
this.
review this, tighten this down, and so next time, we're basically gonna say, by looking at people's language, et cetera, say, here, this is the straw man we're now gonna have for a while, we're gonna pull out of our back pockets and eat it. And so the second item is to.
Sorry, just to go back to
Yep.
the first item is, we're supposed to distill this down into a paragraph,
It doesn't have to be a
well,
paragraph.
or two of,
Or a page. or
but it's
two.
supposed to be our philosophy?
And I think the goals. So
Our
it's-
philosophy
yeah.
and a summary of the goals?
Right, so I would claim that I attempted it here, and I put some logic in behind that, so I would, when I'm doing it, I'm gonna rip out my commentary. I'm gonna go down and listen, having people talked about their words, I'm probably gonna change a few of these things, I'll tighten it up, I'll talk about Don's stuff. I suspect that others would go and either use Marjorie's or start with mine, say, I really think these two things need to change. And then we would come back and look at them. So
We're not going to be that far off.
no, I don't think we're that far off, and it doesn't have to be perfect, but we do want to basically say this is the straw man that we will use. And so I think it has to provide these kinds of pieces, whether it does a philosophy or a single paragraph that encompasses these things. It could be either one, but you're trying to get it down to something like that.
And then, is the idea when we go to dig into the Onion Mountain management plan, is that still gonna have the same goals in there, and we'll go through those goals individually? Or is the idea that the goal, there aren't gonna be any goals in the management plan, it'll all be moved into this?
I would say that what we would then do is, if you look at the management plan as its own document, the forester that put together these 8 goals. He went through a nice inventory process, and he went through a process that said, these are recommendations for how it's changing. I would look at that, and I would say, which of these things are consistent or not consistent with these goals? A bunch of them are consistent in some ways. But I think if you look at it, you will find a few areas that really need a lot more work. One is, what do we think about invasive control? What's this definition of active management? Are there other ways to achieve that same goal? And I would come back and say, when I read this plan, these are the 5 areas or 6 areas I think we need more work on that are consistent with our goals. I don't think we're changing their document. It's a document that exists in itself right now. We're going to try to then go back and say, what information do we want to add and have a discussion about, so that we can send that back as part of the recommendation.
Right.
And it should be consistent with what we stated for our philosophy and the goals here. It should be consistent with that. And so I see us as doing that for Onion Mountain. I see us as going back and saying, well, we've done this for Onion Mountain, but part of our philosophy is that we will look at this within the wider context. So we're going to have to figure out how to do that as a part of the wider context. But we have this other one in front of us, we can start this first part. Because I think all these discussions are going to be common to these other ones as well. We don't have to wait to learn about these things from those. And I'm thinking, once we go through this, we talk about each of these, we're going to come up with a few action items of how we're going to get more information on these few areas. These other ones we agree with, so we're going to kind of be managing by deviation from what we think is missing. Does that make sense? Does that kind of sound,
Gives us a framework to evaluate the plans.
is that what you were thinking, Jim?
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm still not clear how this document is gonna fit with the management plans, but.
That was, I think that's kind of Don's point, is once we even go through this, we still have to go back and look at the management plans.
Yeah.
But I think if you go back and look at it, you can say, in the very front page, we really don't disagree with many of these goals that he's outlined.
Right.
We don't think number 8 is that important, which is,
Yeah.
how to do timber harvest. But the ones that we really care about are, do we think we've done all the inventory that we need? He did it from a forestry perspective. Are we missing that? Are we, as part of our goals to provide suitable recreational activities, have we done that well? Or are there other things to be thinking about? So that's how I see it as being useful.
Focus.
Is it, would it be more helpful to just leave this as is for now, instead of trying to distill it down to a paragraph? Because it's, I don't know that there's, Don had some comments on here, but they were, pretty specific things that were in here. I don't know that, the way that we condense it eventually, if that's what we end up doing, the way that we condense it might change based on,
And I
how
don't
we
really
dig
even
into
know the
the.
purpose of condensing it. I think, we're close.
Yeah.
We're not publishing this necessarily, but I think it's to inform us to how to review this. And I think coming up with a few tactics might help clarify our thinking in the next go-round.
I absolutely agree. I think, from my perspective, I would take this and fix some of the words I've heard.
Yeah.
I think Don had an interesting idea about what an alternative way this might look would be. And I think all of us can sit there and try to do that tweaking. But if you come back and say, look, the thing here's 3 words that I really don't like, and I'm not sure what the answer is, just circle them. If you don't want to do any more of that, we can have a talk about it, or we can just lump it.
Yeah.
But I think we wanted to let people have a chance to put their own mark on this, which was always my goal. This was something to say, this is what I'm thinking, let everybody put a mark on it, but I do want to, by the time we're going to the next meeting.
And really, it's an
talk about it.
exercise to think about what we want, which is the whole purpose of this discussion, is to
That's right.
think about this. What are we trying to do? Why were these lands, what do we have? Why were these lands preserved? What does the town want to do with them? That sort of thing. Now we're thinking, well, how do we get there? And those are the tactics. And then we look at that, well, what tactics are being used in this management plan? Does it fit with what we think these forests should be?
So
or these
Marjorie, when you
open
say we
spaces?
should have a couple of tactics next time,
Not a couple.
are those generic or Onion Mountain specific?
No, I think there should be generic tactics.
Could I recommend a different approach?
All right.
That we just go through the Onion Mountain draft plan, just section by section, and we talk about the different sections.
The individual sections, or as part of our homework, are we gonna go through, we all look at the Onion Mountain Plan and say, these are the things that that I think need some resolution at a high level?
I mean, go through it, and then we just offer up comments on it, and we discuss it.
Well, I think you're gonna find,
'Cause I think there's a lot of, sorry, I know there's a lot of pages in here dedicated to the number of trees per acre
Sure.
and the species of trees, and there's not gonna be a lot of discussion of that. But there might be other sections that we find that, that we do wanna discuss.
but this is a procedural question. Are you thinking we'll just, if we go back and highlight the areas that we think we need work in, then maybe if we say, here's the 3 that I think we need work in, you say that here's the 4 I think you need work in. We don't have to go through this thing line by line or section by section. We can just go to those sections and talk about it. Because that basically means that everything else we think is reasonable at a first level at least. That was the thing I was trying to avoid.
Yeah, and it assumes that everyone
we
does
can-
their homework.
We can try that. We can try that.
Okay.
I think it's gonna be hard for us to discuss tactics without going
No, I
through
was thinking,
the
it wasn't
plan.
about discussing tactics, I think thinking about, various, one of the texts, is, you can have a timber harvest, we can go to the town, we can have a discussion, there are various things. We should be having those discussions, if we're gonna make a recommendation. But let's try it with the Onion Mountain Plan.
Well,
because I think there are
the-
gonna be things that we find that are missing.
The thing that I really like, I gotta say, I really like the structure of the draft plans, the way that they're laid out, because I think that there's a nice progression from the first page has the goals, but then there's, before there's even an inventory of the trees, there's, different categories of things that
Yeah.
make up the forest.
I
that he
think
goes
it's
through that are
an
important.
excellent forest plan. It's a really good forest plan, written from, a good perspective, it's well documented, and that's why I don't think we need to go through tons of it. I think you can zero in on the 2 or 3 things that, from our understanding now, we kind of know, here are the open spots. And if you want, and I think we all have to read it and go and isolate those. I would come back to classes of things, like how much improvements do we really want to do at Onion Mountain? What's the right kind of level of recreational opportunities? And, have we done the inventory completely or well? And how do we manage invasives? I think those are like the 4 areas that, off the top of my head.
There's discussion of deer and hunting.
Yeah, but it's relatively limited in terms of the wildlife, and I think that's another area,
Wildlife
that's the inventory.
Yeah.
That's one of the inventory processes, I think, are.
Well, it's also, it's beyond just knowing what's there. I mean, it's, we have to know what's there, but, there's no discussion as to which thing we're supposedly improving.
Well, yeah, so I would have classified all that as part of the inventory process, but sure, if that's the thing that if that's the thing that you think is missing, that's the thing we want to be talking about.
All
What you
right,
can do, you can do some generic habitat improvement without focusing on specific species or even specific genera.
I disagree. I think whatever you do is if you're going to be doing tree removal, that will have an impact, but you need to know why you're doing it.
setting aside tree removal for the moment, if we're talking about habitat improvement.
No, yes.
If we are.
But you were saying for tree removal, you're going to be doing habitat improvement. But I think, well, it's getting late. I know, why don't we look at it and come back with comments? We'll go that way. All right. That's for next time. What do we have on our agenda for next? We don't have much.
You have this and the application for Park and Rec.
Okay, good. All right. Good. We'll do that. So we'll come back with Onion Mountain next time.
Just want to thank you, in front of you, that I know we passed out, talked to a few people. There was a notification from Eversource for trimming and vegetation removal in their rights-of-way in town. I'll follow up with the representative that sent this notice out to my office. They're just required by law to notify the Inland Wetlands Agency. I just asked specifically where along the rights-of-way they'll be working and what they're planning on doing. That's all.
And I noticed a list of a lot of different pesticides, herbicides and things that they're using. Do they have any wetland crossings or any,
They actually also have areas that, if, on page 3 of the thing, in Connecticut, well, within sensitive areas, the application of herbicides are restricted from the following areas.
okay, good.
Within wetland areas, 10 feet of standing water, 10 feet of any stream, body of water, et cetera, 50 feet of a private well, 100 feet for the public water supply. So there's some limited
It's not very big,
parameters.
10 feet.
No, but they do, they're a utility company,
Yeah, it's
so,
not much we can do about it.
yeah, this is
They
a,
have the
they're,
the,
this is a kind of a courtesy of them giving us a heads up that they're working, because,
so there's really nothing we can,
well, I mean, we can ask them for more information. That's what, as your staff, I'll just reach out to get more information on where along the transmission line they're working. If the map that's attached in the back is 11 by 17. You can see it's the transmission line that's highlighted is length from town line to town line. So it's a little vague on where in town they will be
I
working.
was just thinking some of the formulas, the ones that are more suitable around wetland areas, the surfactants and things that are,
It's interesting what they're actually controlling in invasive species, that list. You know, and what's not on the list. It's kind of interesting.
So,
Let me raise one other issue, if I may. I was approached by a citizen who thought we should take action on fracking waste. And I said to the citizen, well, this question came to us some months ago. Staff advised that there was a state moratorium, that we probably didn't need to worry about that at the present time, and staff would apprise us if the state lifted the moratorium or the landscape changed. The citizen took the view that the state action was not sufficient, and you've noticed in the newspaper perhaps that a number of towns, I think South Windsor was in the paper today, are adopting ordinances and thinking about this. I said, well, if you've got something, give us something in writing, and I'd be happy to bring it to the commission's attention. I'm not going to have an ex parte conversation about this, but if you have something to submit to the commission, I'm sure the commission will be happy to see it. I have not seen further on that, but given the number of towns that are taking action, we should perhaps anticipate we'll hear more about this.
all right. Thank you, Don. All right. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
The
Thank
next
you.
meeting on the 16th,
2 weeks from now?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, before we go, someone came to me and asked, it was the town committee, one of the town committees was asking, saying that it was hard to get people to serve on this commission because we meet twice a month. And they were wondering whether we could meet once a month. I said I'd bring it up, but I don't.
We have talked about this
We have
before. I
talked
think
about it.
Darren was in favor of meeting less frequently,
Yes.
and also earlier or later, I don't remember.
Yeah.
But I think we need to meet twice a month just
That's
to
what I-
keep the application process moving.
your workload for Conservation or Wetlands Commission, it's pretty, I would say, consistent. And the fact that under statute that you have to wait 14 days for, I don't want to call it the cool-off period when an application is filed. If you go to once-a-month meetings, it means that you're telling homeowners, this is mainly who we will deal with, that it'll take 30-plus days
Yeah.
to get an application. At least from a staff perspective, I think because of how this commission meets on a every 2 weeks basis, you're going to have some unhappy people in town that will be
That's what I
telling.
shared with them. That's,
I think the
"Oh, your
other
addition.
Yeah, I
has
mean,
to
the other
wait."
real benefit too is that if, if we see parts of an application that we get that we have problems with, we give the applicant an opportunity to address those for our next meeting. I think, if we were to meet once a month, given the time constraints,
Yep.
we probably would be forced into rejecting a lot more applications.
that's what I shared with the town committee, and I totally agree. But
And the other thing is,
you are the hardy group.
well, we don't have, we often don't have the time to get into the conservation issues, which, as Don's pointed out, like on the Simsbury Meadows stuff is a very big deal. And so if we didn't have the time, we wouldn't be able to get through any of that
No,
stuff.
no. I agree totally. That's what I shared with them, that we needed to meet twice a month. And I want to commend all of you because we come twice a month. And some people don't want to, but you are the hardy group. So I would say there's no, I didn't see that, but I was asked to bring it up, so I did. All right, all in favor?
Oh, yeah, aye.
Thanks.